The technologies used by the ancient Egyptians are living proof that human progress isn't always a straight line. When you look at the razor-sharp precision of their stone cuts and the star-aligned layout of their monuments, it becomes clear they held knowledge that took us thousands of years to rediscover. Is it possible that the Great Pyramid wasn't a tomb at all, but a massive energy generator? Are the three pyramids aligned with the three stars in Orion's belt? How did they drill into some of the hardest rock on the planet without diamonds or steel? And how did they move such colossal stones? This documentary takes you through the technologies of ancient Egypt, from their grasp of biology and astrophysics to the most controversial theories about electricity and the use of acoustic levitation to move stone blocks. Chapter 1. Building the Pyramids, from Ramps to Resonance. There is one structure that embodies mystery and challenges our understanding of history, the Great Pyramid of Giza. For 4,500 years, this artificial mountain has stood as the greatest question on Earth. Its scale is almost impossible to comprehend. 2.5 million limestone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons. The mass of an off-road vehicle. These blocks were lifted to nearly 150 meters, or 492 feet, arranged with a precision that would astonish many modern builders. Yet the real puzzle isn't found in the average stones. It lies deep within the creature's interior. At the pyramid's core, the air grows thick and still. Above us, there is no limestone, only beams. Nine monolithic slabs of pink granite were transported from a quarry 800 kilometers away, roughly 497 miles. Each of these giants weighs between 50 and 80 tons. Picture that, 80 tons, the weight of a modern battle tank or a dozen adult elephants. Another question begins our journey. How did they accomplish this? The most widely accepted explanation is the most human: ingenuity, coordination, and unimaginable labor. The ramp theory. For decades, this remained the standard vision: a colossal straight ramp made of earth and bricks. But there's a problem. To reach the top, such a ramp would need to stretch more than 1.5 kilometers, almost a mile, and would contain more material than the pyramid itself. Hardly practical. Modern engineering offers an alternative: the internal ramp theory. According to this idea, once the base was completed, the Egyptians built a spiraling ramp inside the structure, similar to the floors of a modern parking garage. Blocks would have been hauled up through this hidden internal passage. It's an elegant solution that uses the pyramid as its own scaffolding. Still brute force, yes, but brute force applied with intelligence. Another possibility flips this question entirely. Perhaps the real issue isn't how they lifted the blocks, but that they didn't lift them at all. This theory makes a bold claim. The upper stones weren't carved, they were cast. Supporters argue that Egyptian workers weren't shaping stone, they were making it. They ground soft limestone, combined it with water, lime, and natural binders, and created what amounts to an ancient concrete, or geopolymer. This liquid mixture would have been poured into wooden molds, set directly in place on the pyramid, and left to harden beneath the sun. Such a process could explain the astonishing precision of the blocks. They would solidify perfectly against one another and eliminate the problem of hauling 80 tons up the structure. Eventually, we cross into the frontier of speculation, where known science stops and mystery begins. What if the Egyptians relied not on strength or chemistry, but on a form of physics we no longer understand? Sound is vibration, and vibration can move matter. A high note shattering a glass proves the point. Imagine that principle scaled up. Researchers like Abdul Wahab-e-Qadi have suggested that the Egyptians may have understood acoustic or sonic levitation. By using instruments or chanting, they could generate a very specific resonant frequency. Dust around the stone would begin to rise. The block itself wouldn't float, but its effective weight might drop dramatically, letting a small group of men slide it across the ground as if it were on ice. Is this pure science fiction, or are we being arrogant in assuming our technology is the only one possible? Ramps, concrete, sound, sheer strength, advanced chemistry, or lost physics. The debate remains wide open. What we can say for sure is simple. They achieved it. Welcome to the technology of ancient Egypt. Chapter 2. The Power Plant Hypothesis. Was the Great Pyramid a generator? There's an uncomfortable fact about the world's most famous building. The Great Pyramid is a tomb that never held a body. When Arab explorers forced their way inside in the 9th century, they found no treasure, no mummified pharaoh, no golden furnishings, not even a single hieroglyphic inscription saying, "Here lies Khufu." The structure that was supposedly the greatest funerary monument ever built was completely empty, sterile, silent, and anonymous within. Traditional archaeology claims everything was looted in antiquity, but what if there was nothing to steal? What if the pyramid's purpose wasn't to honor the dead, but to serve the living? This is the foundation of one of the most provocative and captivating theories, the hypothesis that the Great Pyramid functioned as a power plant. This idea doesn't come from Egyptologists, but from engineers, people who look at the so-called sarcophagus in the king's chamber and see a piece of precision equipment instead of a coffin. To understand this theory, we need to step inside the mind of one of history's most brilliant and enigmatic inventors, Nikola Tesla. In the early 20th century, Tesla pursued a bold dream: wireless power transmission. He believed the Earth itself could serve as a massive conductor, sending energy across the planet without a single cable. His now famous Wardenclyffe Tower was built for that very purpose, to capture energy and broadcast it into the atmosphere. But Tesla ran out of funding, and his vision was dismissed as an impossible fantasy. Jump forward to the present. Supporters of the power plant theory look at the Great Pyramid and see, in essence, a gigantic Tesla coil, constructed millennia before Tesla was born. According to this hypothesis, the pyramid wasn't built just anywhere. It was deliberately positioned over undergrowth aquifers. Water flowing through the limestone cavities. Beneath it would create subtle vibrations, a constant stream of acoustic energy. The pyramid, with its precise geometry, would function as a massive antenna or resonator, designed to draw in and amplify this natural Earth energy. This is where the choice of materials becomes crucial. The inner chambers aren't made of limestone. They're carved from Aswan granite, a rock rich in quartz crystals. Quartz has a property known as piezoelectricity. When it's compressed or vibrated, it generates a small electrical charge. The theory suggests that the entire structure was engineered to vibrate, effectively squeezing millions of quartz crystals in unison and transforming Earth's vibration into raw electricity. The so-called air shafts would not have been meant for ventilation at all, but rather as conduits for a chemical reaction, possibly to flood the Queen's chamber with gases that increased conductivity. The King's chamber with its granite sarcophagus wasn't a coffin, but the core of the generator, humming with immense power. And the final output? The pyramid was originally encased in gleaming white limestone, which would have acted as insulation, and topped with a capstone, possibly made of gold or another highly conductive material. This golden apex, according to the theory, would have collected the energy produced inside and transmitted it upward into the ionosphere, exactly what Tesla envisioned, allowing it to be used by a civilization that may have lit its temples or powered tools we can't yet imagine. Is all of this pure fantasy? Or could these ancient builders have been far more advanced than we assume? The power plant hypothesis leaves us with an uncomfortable question. Which idea is harder to believe? That a Bronze Age society moved 80-ton blocks using only ropes and ramps? Or that the same society understood a form of physics we've lost? Chapter 3. Is there something beneath the Sphinx? On the Giza Plateau, the Great Pyramid does not stand alone. At its feet rests a second and equally iconic mystery, the Great Sphinx. Officially, it's a guardian bearing the face of Pharaoh Khafre. Yet many researchers look at this colossal statue and see an inconsistency. The body of the Sphinx and the pit from which it was carved show erosion patterns very different from those on the pyramids. It's not just desert wind. These appear to be deep marks caused by water, by heavy rainfall that hasn't touched the region of Egypt in thousands of years, long before the time of Khafre. If the Sphinx is far older than we're told, who carved it? And what is it guarding? Here is where history collides with one of the strangest prophecies of the 20th century. It comes from a man known as Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. Cayce was an American psychic who during the 1930s entered trance states and delivered readings on history, health, and the future. In several of these seasons, he spoke of a forgotten era. He described a great loss of civilization, Atlantis. He claimed that foreseeing their own destruction, the survivors fled to Egypt. There, beneath the Giza Plateau, they built an underground archive to preserve all their knowledge, their science, their history, and their technology. Cayce called it the Hall of Records. According to his prophecy, this hall wasn't a myth, but a physical location, and he gave a precise placement. It would lie in an underground chamber, hidden between the Sphinx's front paws. For decades, this remained nothing more than a mystic's dream, until modern technology allowed something Cayce could never have done: seeing beneath the ground without digging. In the 1990s, several research teams brought ground-penetrating radar and seismographs to Giza, tools that use sound and radio waves to map what lies below the surface. And what did they find? Anomalies. Exactly where Cayce had pointed. The instruments detected a hidden cavity under the sand, a hollow space with defined edges and right angles, concealed between the Sphinx's paws. It wasn't formed by nature. It bore the unmistakable signature of human design. The discovery shocked the world, but the official response was swift. Egyptian authorities halted the investigation and denied excavation permits. They insisted the formations were nothing more than natural fissures in the rock. Yet the idea of an underground Giza didn't vanish, because in fact, such a thing does exist. Not far from the Sphinx, archaeologists uncovered an astonishing structure: the Osiris Shaft. It's a complex system of tunnels descending vertically through multiple chambers, ultimately reaching a flooded tomb at the water table, a true underground lake. This proves that the ancient Egyptians had both the skill and the intention to build deep, elaborate structures beneath the sand. So what exactly is that cavity under the Sphinx? Is it just a geological crack, as the official explanation claims? Or is it the sealed entrance to an ancient library? Chapter 4. Electricity in Egyptian Temples. Imagine you're an artist in ancient Egypt. Your canvas is the wall of a tomb, buried deep beneath the desert. There are no windows. The darkness is absolute. How did you see what you were painting? The obvious answer is fire, oil lamps. But this is where the mystery begins. Anyone who has used a candle or a small oil flame knows they produce black smoke, soot. If thousands of artists spent years working inside these sealed chambers, the ceiling should be coated in a thick black layer. Yet in the most famous tombs, the ceilings are astonishingly clean. Modern restorers do find traces of soot, but the amount is incredibly small. Far too little for the enormous amount of work that was done. How can that be? Archaeology offers an official explanation. They didn't use wooden torches, but high-quality vegetable oil lamps, such as sesame oil, and added one key ingredient: natron salt. This salt, the same one used for mummification, purified the flame. It made the oil burn at a higher temperature, producing a brighter light, and crucially, almost no smoke. But is this clever low-smoke lamp the only tool they used to illuminate tunnels? Or does this explanation conceal an even more astonishing truth? For those who think so, the evidence is carved in stone in the underground crypt of the Temple of Hathor in Dendera. The reliefs there are baffling. They show several figures holding an enormous object shaped like a transparent bulb or pear. Inside this bulb, a serpent stretches from end to end in a way strikingly similar to the filament of an old-style light bulb. The serpent filament emerges from a lotus flower, which functions like a socket or insulator. A cable, shown as a braided stem, extends from the lotus and connects to a strange box at the base of the Dayid pillar. To an Egyptologist, the Dayid is the backbone of Osiris, a symbol of stability. But to an electrical engineer, it looks very much like a high-voltage insulator. The resemblance of the entire carving to a Crookes tube, a 19th century glass device that was the precursor to neon lighting. It's so striking that many refuse to believe it's a coincidence. Is this evidence that the ancient Egyptians mastered electricity? A source of clean, fireless light used for sacred work in the darkest tombs and temples. Official science offers the mythological interpretation. They tell us it's not a technical diagram, but a visual poem.
Sebau sejid, unan rau.
The bulb is the night sky, or the womb of the goddess Nut. The serpent is the god Harsmotus, representing the energy of the rising sun. The Daid pillar is the spine of Osiris, bringing stability to creation. Is the Dendera relief simply a beautiful metaphor for the birth of the universe? Or is it the lone surviving diagram of a lost technology we have yet to understand? Chapter 5. Architects of the Cosmos. The Orion Correlation Theory. Of all the achievements of Egyptian engineering, one remains almost supernatural: their precision. The Great Pyramid isn't merely pointed north. It is aligned to true north with astonishing accuracy, off by only 0.03 of a degree. Think about that. Today we rely on GPS and satellites to pinpoint true north. They did it 4,500 years ago in the Bronze Age. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of precision astronomy. The builders knew the sky was a perfect clock, and they didn't just use the stars to locate north. Some believe they used the heavens as an architectural blueprint. This is the foundation of the Orion Correlation Theory. In the 1980s, researcher Robert Bovell made a simple observation that changed everything. Egyptologists had long wondered why the 3 pyramids of Giza were not laid out in a perfectly straight line. The 3rd pyramid, Menkaures, is slightly offset. Bovell looked up in the night sky and found the same imperfection in the cosmos. The 3 pyramids of Giza, in their size and arrangement, appeared to mirror the 3 stars of Orion's belt. The 2 largest pyramids, Khufu and Khafre, correspond to the 2 brightest stars. The 3rd pyramid, Menkaures, is similar and less slightly off the main line, exactly like the 3rd star in the belt. A coincidence? To the Egyptians, this would not have been a coincidence. It would have been a sacred obligation. The constellation we call Orion represented Osiris, their god of resurrection and the afterlife. The destiny of the pharaoh was to be reborn as a star within that constellation. What better way to guarantee this cosmic journey than to build his tomb as a map of his celestial destination? But the theory goes even deeper. The sky we see today is not the same one the Egyptians saw, because of their cosmic cycle called precession. The stars shift slowly over millennia. Balval calculated that although the alignment is reasonably good in the era where the pyramids were built, around 4,500 years ago, there is only one moment in time when the layout of the pyramids on the ground perfectly matches the belt of the Orion sky. That moment is not 4,500 years ago. It is 12,500 years ago, and that date changes everything. Archaeology tells us that 12,500 years ago, Egypt had no civilization, only hunter-gatherers. Is the alignment with Orion's belt just pure coincidence? Or could it have been the astonishing trace of something extraordinary? A sign left by a lost civilization, far older than the Egyptians themselves. Chapter 6. Sound Engineering in the Great Pyramid? Most of us think of Egyptian temples as places meant to be seen, colossal statues, glowing hieroglyphs. But what if they were also designed to be heard? Modern acoustic engineers know that the shape of a room changes how it sounds. A Gothic cathedral makes chants soar. A small carpeted room swallows them. When sound experts enter the Great Pyramid, they encounter something unexpected. It isn't a dead space. It's a giant musical instrument. Inside the king's chamber, sound behaves in unusual ways. If you strike the granite sarcophagus, it rings like a massive bell. But the most fascinating element is the room itself. Experts have shown that the king's chamber has a natural resonant frequency. It vibrates most strongly when exposed to certain tones. That frequency is, specifically, 438 Hz. Was this a coincidence or intentional? Some theorists suggest that Egyptian priests used chanting to activate this resonance. Imagine a ceremony where a choir intones the precise note. The entire room would begin to vibrate, amplifying the sound until it could be felt physically in the chest and bones. That wouldn't be mere music. It would be psychoacoustic technology. We know that certain sound frequencies can alter human consciousness. They can induce trance states, deep relaxation, or even mystical experiences. Could this have been the true purpose of the king's chamber? Not a tomb for a dead body, but an initiation chamber for the living. A place where the pharaoh or high priest lay inside the granite coffer and through resonant sound was guided into an altered state of consciousness to travel the stars without dying. This idea of sound engineering isn't limited to the pyramids. In temples such as Abydos or Karnak, we find forests of columns that seem designed to channel and amplify the priest's voice. So the question lingers, is the extraordinary acoustics of the king's chamber merely an accident? A byproduct of its granite dimensions? Or are we hearing, quite literally, the echo of a lost technology? Chapter 7. Moving Colossal Stones. Now it's time to return to solid ground, literally, because before any pyramid could touch the sky, it had to be torn from the earth. Let's travel 800 kilometers, or 497 miles south of Giza, to Aswan. This is the home of pink granite, the hardest and most prized stone in Egypt. Here the landscape isn't desert, but an open scar carved into living rock. The puzzle here isn't mystical, it's physical. How did the Egyptians cut a stone harder than the tools they possessed? They had no steel. Their copper chisels were nearly useless against granite, a rock far too tough. Their answer was patience, an even tougher stone, dolerite, which they used to pound the granite relentlessly into shape. Dolerite is a black volcanic rock, incredibly hard. Workers used it as spherical hammerstones. They didn't cut the granite, they smashed it. Strike after strike, they pulverized the rock little by little, creating trenches around the block they intended to extract. We can see the evidence around the famous unfinished obelisk of Aswan. It was a monster, 42 meters long, about 138 feet, and it would have weighed nearly 1,200 tons. Surrounding it, the pockmarks from dolerite blows remain visible today. Once the block was freed, the logistical nightmare began: transportation. How do you move 1,000 tons with no wheels and no cranes? The Egyptian answer was water and sand. They waited for the Nile's annual flood. As the water rose, they turned the quarries into temporary ports. Massive barges built from cedar trunks imported from Lebanon were used to float these enormous stones downstream to Giza or Thebes. But what about on land? How did they move these gigantic blocks from the Nile's port to the temple? We don't have to guess. The Egyptians left us clues. Let's recreate the scene. The heat is brutal. A colossal 600-ton statue designed for the noble Jehitu-Yehotep is tied to a gigantic wooden sled. Thick ropes, each as wide as a man's arm, stretched out. 172 men arranged in 4 rows, pulls in unison, their muscles straining with the effort. The sled barely moves, its runners digging into the dry desert sand. The struggle is agonizing. A man walks just ahead of the sled, holding a jar, pouring a precise amount of water onto the sand directly in front of the runners. It's an act of pure genius. Modern physicists have confirmed that just the right amount of water cuts sand friction in half. Damp sand becomes firm, almost like a paved road. Chapter 8. How did they raise obelisks and statues? The Nile has delivered its cargo to the Temple of Karnak, a 300-ton obelisk, 30 meters, nearly 90 feet tall, carved from a single piece of pink granite. Now it lies on its side in the sand. The pharaoh, Hatshepsut, has given the order. It must be raised. But how did they do it without cranes or engines? Egyptian engineers didn't try to lift the obelisk from the tip, an enormous task. Their plan was much smarter. They made the obelisk stand by letting it fall in a controlled way. The plan had 3 ingenious steps. First, they built a massive ramp out of mud brick. Hundreds of men pulled a giant wooden sled on which the obelisk was strapped. Second, they positioned the obelisk over a huge pit dug into the earth. That pit had to be filled to the brim with sand. The third part is the most astonishing. The workers didn't push anything upward. Instead, they opened small gates at the bottom of the pit. The dry sand began slipping out beneath it like a giant hourglass. As the sand drained away, the level of the pit dropped, and as the level dropped, the obelisk's base, hundreds of tons of stone, slowly sank with it. When the obelisk was almost vertical but not quite upright, brute force came into play. Hundreds of men on the opposite side pulled on thick ropes, guiding and locking it into its pedestal. Chapter 9. Sacred Architecture, the Precision of the Temples. Egyptian temples were not simple buildings for prayer. They were places built to inspire awe, to tell stories, and sometimes to capture the sun itself. Imagine stepping into the great hippo-style hall of Karnak. It's a forest of stone. 134 colossal columns rise more than 20 meters, or 65 feet. The ceiling is barely visible, fading into shadow. They were recreating in eternal stone, the sacred marsh from which their myths say the world was born. Walking through Karnak was walking through the first day of creation, a theater designed to make you feel the presence of the gods. But the ultimate proof of Egyptian genius wasn't size, it was precision. And there is no better example of that than Abu Simbel. Pharaoh Ramses II carved his temple into a mountain of solid rock. At the entrance, 4 colossal statues of himself, each 20 meters, or 65 feet tall, watched over the Nile. Imagine standing in total darkness inside the temple, 60 meters or 197 feet from the entrance. Days go by, then months. The inner sanctuary is always in shadow. Until February 21st, the date of Ramses' coronation, at dawn, a single ray of sunlight enters the doorway of the temple. It travels in a straight line down the passage and reaches the innermost sanctuary. The sun illuminates the faces of 3 of the 4 statues: the god Amun-Ra, Ramses himself, and the god Ra-Harakti. But the 4th statue, Ptah, the god of darkness and the underworld, remains in shadow. This is no accident. It's a celestial calculation of astonishing accuracy. Egyptian engineers aimed the entire temple, like a stone telescope, toward the exact point on the horizon, where the sun would rise on that specific day. They were not only builders but astronomers, and their temples were more than monuments. They were cosmic timekeepers, stone calculators created for one purpose: to show that the gods and the pharaoh ruled the universe. Chapter 10: The Valley of the Kings, the Technology of Concealment. The Great Pyramid was a masterpiece of engineering, and also a colossal failure. As a security system, it was a disaster. It stood as a gigantic sign that screamed, "The greatest treasure in the world is here," and of course, it was looted almost immediately. Later pharaohs learned the lesson. If you can't build a fortress big enough to stop thieves, then don't build one at all. Or rather, build it, but hide it. Welcome to the Valley of the Kings. Here, the technology isn't about reaching for the sky, but about disappearing beneath the earth. The plan was invisibility. Picture the pharaoh's elite workers. We stand in a barren, scorching, remote valley. They aren't building a monument. They face a simple crack at the base of a cliff. Their mission is to carve the pharaoh's eternal home. They have bronze chisels that bend constantly, and wooden hammers. The work is brutal. They must dig a descending tunnel 100 meters, or 328 feet, long through solid limestone. Everything they chip away must be carried out. Hundreds of thousands of baskets of stone debris, hauled by hand through a narrow, airless, sloping passage. And in that darkness, they must paint. How did they see? They used their ingenious high-quality oil lamps with natron salt. The flame burned bright, clean, and almost smokeless, allowing them to create the masterpieces we admire today. But how did they protect the tomb? The first line of defense was secrecy. Once the burial chamber was complete, the entrance was sealed with stone, buried under rubble, and left for the desert to erase it from the map. The second line of defense was deception. The builders designed the tombs as labyrinths meant to confuse the mind. Suppose we're an Egyptian thief. We break the first seal and step into a long descending corridor. Suddenly, the floor vanishes beneath us. Ahead lies a massive pit, 5 meters or 16 feet deep, impossible to cross easily. The thief must risk his life to get across, perhaps by laying down planks. If he makes it to the other side, he continues forward and finds a chamber. But the chamber is empty. Or maybe it holds only a few broken jars. It looks as though someone has already taken everything. This was a psychological trick. The goal was to make the thief give up. He would think, "I've arrived too late," and leave with nothing.
Stuff.
But the real treasure was right next door, hidden behind a false wall that looked like solid rock, but was actually painted plaster, concealing the true burial chamber of all its riches. And did this technology work? No. Despite pits, hidden seals, and curses, nearly every tomb in the valley was looted in antiquity. Except one, the most famous of them all, the tomb of Tutankhamun. Why did it survive? Ironically, not because of its security, which was quite simple. It survived thanks to forgetfulness and luck. Thieves broke in at least twice shortly after his burial, but they were stopped or only managed a quick raid. Then decades later, the builders of the tomb of a far greater pharaoh, Ramses IV, dug directly above it. Without realizing it, they dumped thousands of tons of stone debris over Tutankhamun's entrance, erasing its location from history. The most famous tomb in the world was preserved not by traps, but because it ended up buried beneath the rubble of another tomb. Chapter 11. The 365-day solar calendar and the water clocks. Today our lives are ruled by the clock, but who invented timekeeping? Who first decided that a year should have 365 days? The answer is the Egyptians, and they didn't do it for philosophy. They did it out of sheer survival. The Nile was their lifeline, but it was also unpredictable. Every year a massive flood arrived and erased the land. How could they know when to prepare, when to plant? They needed to foresee the future. Picture a priest standing on the roof of a temple in the darkness before dawn. He faces east. For months, a bright star has been hidden by the glare of the sun. But on one specific day of the year, just before sunrise, the star reappears. That star was Sirius, the one they called Sopdet. The Egyptians noticed two astonishing things. First, the day Sirius returned, the Nile flood was about to begin. It was nature's warning. Second, if they counted the days from one appearance of Sirius to the next, the number was always the same, 365 days. They had discovered the exact length of the solar year. Based on this, they created the first practical solar calendar in history. They divided it into 12 months of 30 days each, and at the end of the year, they added 5 extra days, festivals dedicated to the gods. This calendar is essentially the same one we use today. Every time you check your calendar, you're using a system invented 5,000 years ago to predict the rise of an African river. But having a calendar wasn't enough. They still needed to solve the problem of daily time. Picture that priest again. This time inside the temple at night without sunlight, there are no shadows, so sundials are useless. How could he know the exact moment to perform the midnight rituals? The answer lay in a fascinating object before him, a water clock, or clepsydra. At first glance, it looks like a stone jar with a tiny hole in the bottom through which water drips into a bowl. But its design hides a masterpiece of engineering. They shaped the jar with sloping walls, wide at the top and narrow at the bottom, like an inverted cone. This form compensated for the decreasing pressure of the water, making the water level drop at a perfectly steady and predictable rate. Thanks to this, the priest only had to read the carved markings inside the jar to know the exact time, even in total darkness. In this way, the Egyptians went from observing a star once a year to controlling every drop of time day and night. Chapter 12. Technology of Eternity. The Science of Mummification.
and Enjet and Mootness.
For the ancient Egyptians, death was not the end. It was the beginning of a perilous journey. And like any traveler, they needed 2 things to survive: a durable vehicle and an accurate map. The vehicle was the physical body of the body decayed. The soul, the Ba and the Ka, would fade away forever. Thus was born the science of mummification. The enemy was moisture, which caused decay. The Egyptian solution was a miraculous natural compound called natron. Imagine a workshop on the banks of the Nile. The body of the deceased lies on a slanted stone table. The embalmers work with surgical precision. First, they remove the internal organs, which decompose quickly, and store them in special jars. Then comes the crucial step. They cover the entire body inside and out with mountains of white powder, natron. Natron is a natural mixture of salts, sodium carbonate, and sodium bicarbonate, found in the dry lake beds of the desert. It acts like a superpowered chemical sponge. For 40 days, the natron absorbs every drop of moisture from the flesh, drying the body until it becomes tough leather, halting decomposition permanently. The vehicle was ready. Now they needed the map. The Egyptian afterlife, the Duat, was an underworld filled with demons, lakes of fire, and gates guarded by monsters who demanded secret passwords. To navigate this world, the Egyptians created the Book of the Dead, a guide for the afterlife. It was a form of information technology, written on papyrus scrolls placed inside the coffin beside the mummy. The Book of the Dead gave the soul the exact phrases to recite before the 42 divine judges. The negative confession: I have not killed, I have not stolen, I have not lied. It was a legal script designed to secure a verdict of innocence. It contained the precise spells to drive away the underworld serpents, the maps needed to avoid getting lost in the dark pathways, and most importantly, the instructions for the final test. In the Hall of Judgment, the heart of the deceased was weighed on a scale against the feather of truth. Ammit, the devourer of the dead, a creature with a crocodile head, a lion's forelegs, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, sat patiently behind the scale. If the heart was heavy, filled with sin, and tipped the balance, the god Thoth would declare it impure. At that moment, Ammit would lunge forward and consume it. For the Egyptians, this fate was far worse than torment in the underworld. It was total annihilation. The soul ceased to exist forever, erased from the universe, losing any chance at eternal life. But the person who had lived a just and honest life, their heart would be light, free of wrongdoing. The scale would balance perfectly. Thoth would record the favorable verdict, and Osiris, the supreme judge, would proclaim the soul true of voice. With the body preserved through chemistry and the soul armed with sacred knowledge, the Egyptian was prepared to defeat death itself and live forever among the stars. Chapter 13. The Science of Beauty: Eyes, Perfumes, and Mirrors. Egyptian noblewomen didn't gaze into glass mirrors, but into polished discs of copper or bronze, burnished until they shone like the sun. For her, this object wasn't vanity, it was a magical tool. By looking into it, she believed she could see not only her face, but her Ka, her spirit. For the Egyptians, beauty was hygiene, medicine, and divine power. The most famous aspect of this science was the eye. The noble woman picks up a slender stick of ivory or wood. She dips it into a small jar filled with a heavy black powder, kohl. With precision, she draws the iconic almond-shaped line that elongates her eyes. This is her daily medicine. Black coal was made from ground galena, lead sulfide. Green coal, used in earlier periods, came from malachite, copper carbonate. Today we know that these lead-based compounds, in tiny doses, stimulated the immune defenses of the eye, killing bacteria that cause dangerous infections, a constant threat in a land of dust and stagnant Nile water. On her head, she doesn't wear her own hair. It is shaved or kept very short. In such a hot climate, hygiene was essential, and hair was a haven for lice. Instead, a servant places a heavy, elaborate wig on her head. It's made from real human hair, imported, expensive, woven into hundreds of fine braids and set with beeswax. And atop the wig, something unusual, a cone of perfumed fat. As the night unfolds and her body heat rises, the cone slowly melts. It releases a veil of luxurious fragrance over her shoulders, a thick ointment created by sleeping lotus flowers, lilies, and incense in animal fat or vegetable oils for weeks, capturing their essence. The noblewoman is ready. Her bronze mirror, medicinal coal, and perfumed wig don't simply make her beautiful. They keep her clean, protected from illness, and elevate her to a near-divine status. Chapter 14. Surgery and Pharmacopoeia, the medicine of the pharaohs. We are on a battlefield in ancient Egypt, 3,500 years ago. A soldier has taken a brutal blow to the head from a mace. His skull is fractured. What happens next? They call for a doctor, a Sunu. What this physician did afterward is recorded in one of the most astonishing documents in history, the Edwin Smith Papyrus, the world's first trauma surgery manual. The doctor examined the wound with scientific detachment. He touched the shattered skull, felt the pulse in the neck. If the brain was exposed, the papyrus describes what he would see: pulsations, like molten copper in a crucible. It is the earliest known description of the human brain and cerebrospinal fluid. His toolkit contained instruments a modern surgeon would recognize instantly: bronze scalpels, sharpened like razors, forceps for removing bone fragments, saws and needles for stitching the skin. They applied honey directly onto open wounds. Today, we know honey is a powerful natural antibacterial agent that prevents infection. They boiled willow bark to treat pain and fever. Centuries later, we discovered that willow bark contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. They placed moldy bread on skin infections. Without realizing it, they were using a primitive form of penicillin thousands of years before Fleming. They also had specialists. They were dentists who drained abscesses and secured loose teeth with gold wire. They were ophthalmologists who treated eye infections with ointments made of copper and honey. Of course, magic never completely disappeared. If an illness had no visible cause, like an internal fever, it was blamed on a demon or an angry god, and in those cases, spells were necessary. But for anything they could see, touch, and repair, broken bones, war wounds, toothaches, the Egyptians relied on observation on metal tools and on medical science that laid the foundation for modern healing. Chapter 15. Ancient Biotechnology. The production of bread and beer. How were thousands of workers who built the pyramids paid? How was a marching army fed? The answer lies in two products: bread and beer. This was an industrial operation and the world's first form of biotechnology. Without knowing it, the Egyptians became the earliest masters of domesticating a living, invisible organism: yeast. A state-run bakery from 4,000 years ago was a loud, hot, smoky place, a factory for human fuel. Everything began with grain, usually emmer wheat. Men and women knelt beside stone grinders, sliding one stone over another to crush it. The work was exhausting and had a hidden cost. With every grinding, tiny fragments of the millstone chipped off and mixed with the flour. That grit baked into every loaf of bread. The teeth of preserved Egyptian mummies are horribly worn, ground down to a pulp, evidence of a lifetime spent eating stone bread. But not every loaf was fully baked. Some were pulled from the oven half-cooked, still doughy inside. These loaves were taken to another section of the workshop. There, workers crumbled the bread into large clay vats and added water, sometimes sweetening the mixture with dates. The yeast, still alive in the half-baked bread, awakened in the sugary water. It began consuming the sugar and releasing carbon dioxide and alcohol. The mixture bubbled, fermented, and transformed. The result was Egyptian beer, a thick, cloudy, nourishing liquid, more like an alcoholic soup, a kind of liquid bread.
Good to see you smile again.
This duo of bread and beer was the backbone of Egypt. It was food, wages, and medicine all at once, made possible by the first bioengineers in history. Chapter 16. Irrigation Technology on the Nile. Egyptian civilization was a gift of the Nile, but it was also a deadly challenge. One year the flood was too low and people starved. The next year it came roaring in and wiped out entire villages. To survive, the Egyptians couldn't rely on prayers alone. They had to measure. They needed to predict and control the river. This desperate need inspired their first great data technology, the nilometer. The concept was simple but brilliant. It was a stone structure, sometimes a deep well built on the riverbank. Marks carved into the walls measured the water level in cubits, the Egyptian unit of length. Priests observed the level and recorded it. Day after day, they gathered data. Why? Because these measurements were the economic forecast of the entire kingdom. If the records show the flood reaching only 12 cubits, the pharaoh knew famine was coming and ordered grain to be stored. If it reached 16 cubits, it was the perfect flood for a rich harvest. If it shot up to 18, it meant a disastrous surge that would destroy embankments. Once they predicted the flood, they had to make use of it. The Egyptians divided the Nile Valley into a giant grid of fields surrounded by earthen walls, like shallow basins. When the flood arrived, they opened a gate and allowed one of these basins to fill. They trapped the water there for weeks, letting the precious black silt, the best fertilizer in the world, settle into the soil. But what happened during the dry season when the river fell and the field sat high and dry? Lifting water by hand, bucket by bucket, was exhausting work. So they invented a simple machine that revolutionized agriculture, the shaduf, or counterpoised lever. It was a long pole on a pivot. At one end, a heavy counterweight, a ball of clay and stone. At the other, a bucket tied to a rope. The farmer would bend down and pull the bucket into the river. Then he released the rope, and the counterweight lifted the full bucket up to the irrigation canal. With this device, one man could do the work of four. The nilometer measured the water. The basins captured it. The shaduf lifted it. This wasn't magic. It was the hydraulic engineering that built a civilization. Chapter 17. The Engine of the Empire. Agricultural Technology. Each year, the Nile flood left behind a gift, a thick layer of rich black silt. It was the best fertilizer in the world, delivered for free along the entire valley. But that gift was useless unless seeds could be planted quickly. The silt was moist and fertile, but it dried and hardened under the sun. Egyptian farmers had a very small window of time to sow their crops. They needed technology. Their first key tool was the light plow. Two oxen, joined by a wooden yoke, pulled this plow. A farmer walked behind it, gripping two handles to guide the blade. The plow carved a shallow furrow into the black earth. Immediately behind him, another worker, often a family member, threw wheat or barley seeds into the open groove. This technology allowed a single family to plant an entire field in a fraction of the time it would take to dig by hand. After months of irrigation and sunlight, the fields turned into a sea of golden grain. Harvest time arrived, and for this, they used another essential tool, the hand sickle, a perfect handheld saw. Teams of harvesters moved across the fields, gripping bundles of grain and slicing them with the swift flick of the wrist. It was cheap to make, easy to repair, and astonishingly efficient. Chapter 18: Information Technology. An empire needs a reliable system for communication and record keeping. It must track taxes, send military orders, and preserve its history for eternity. The Egyptians created one of the most efficient systems in the ancient world. The physical medium for that system grew wild in the marshes of the Nile, the papyrus plant. From it, they crafted a light, flexible, cream-colored sheet. It became the first practical writing surface in history, invented thousands of years before modern paper. Once the material existed, they needed the writing system itself. For temple walls, they used hieroglyphs, a sacred code designed to be monumental and everlasting. For daily tasks, however, hieroglyphs were too slow. On papyrus, scribes developed hieratic, a cursive, fast-moving version of the same language, written with quick, fluid strokes. It became the script of accounting, taxation, and letters. Finally, they required the tools to write, the scribe's palette. Sitting cross-legged with the wooden palette in hand, the scribe wrote using a simple reed brush.
These scrolls must reach the temple before
With a roll of papyrus, a palette of ink, and a reed pen, a single scribe could record a harvest, dispatch a battle order, or write a poem that would survive for 5,000 years. Chapter 19: The Pharaoh's Mathematics, Geometry in Service of the State. Egyptian mathematics was born from a practical and chaotic necessity: the annual flooding of the Nile. Each year when the river overflowed onto the valley, it brought new life in the form of fertile silt. But it also erased everything else: property boundaries, field markers, and borders. When the water receded, chaos ruled. Where did one farmer's land end and a neighbor's begin? To restore order, and more importantly, to collect taxes, the pharaoh's government needed a way to remeasure and realign land with precision. The solution was practical geometry. For measurements to work across the entire kingdom, from the Delta to Nubia, they needed a standard. This became the first major invention of their system, the royal cubit. It was the official unit of measurement based on the pharaoh's forearm plus the width of his hand, about 52.4 centimeters, or 20.62 inches. Temples housed master cubits, precision rods made of granite or wood, against which all other measuring sticks in the kingdom had to be calibrated. It was a technology of standardization. With this tool, teams of experts known as rope stretchers traveled the valley, measuring land. Why such precision? Because of taxes. The pharaoh owned all the land. Farmers paid their rent as a percentage of their harvest, and that percentage was based on the area of their fields. Chapter 20. Naval Engineering. The Nile was Egypt's backbone, its highway, its food supply, and its defensive line. For a civilization that lived and survived by the water, mastering shipbuilding was the key to power. The earliest achievement was a simple boat made of papyrus. By bundling Nile reeds, they created light, fast vessels perfect for fishing in the marshes or for local transport. For heavy tasks, like moving granite blocks for the pyramids or transporting grain, they developed wooden cargo barges. These had a brilliant design, a flat bottom that allowed them to sail through shallow waters near the riverbank without getting stuck. To steer them, they didn't use a modern rudder, but enormous oars mounted at the stern. Their greatest ingenuity lay in how they used nature. The Nile flows north toward the sea, but the wind blows almost constantly southward from the Mediterranean. The Egyptians turned this into a two-way engine. To travel north, downstream, no motors or effort were needed. They simply lowered the sail, lifted the oars, and let the river's current carry them to their destination. To travel south, upstream, everything reversed. The river pushed against them, but now the wind was at their backs. They raised a large square sail, and the wind did the work, driving the boat effortlessly against the current. And how did they steer these vessels? They had no central modern-style rudder. Instead, they used gigantic steering oars. At the stern, one or several strong men handled these massive oars, which acted like rudders to turn the ship. When the Egyptians needed to explore beyond the borders, they built seagoing ships. These had to be much stronger and deeper to survive the waves of the Mediterranean or the Red Sea. With these ships, they launched legendary expeditions to the land of Punt in Africa to bring back incense and gold, or to Lebanon to import the precious cedar wood they needed. Finally, there was a category of vessels that were purely spiritual technology. Sacred boats carried the statues of the gods on ceremonial journeys along the river.
Behold the key of life. Awaken, great spirits of the stars.
The most famous is the solar bark, found beside the Great Pyramid, a cedar ship capable of sailing the open ocean. But it never touched the water. It was built and buried so that the pharaoh's soul could travel across the heavens, with the sun god Ra for all eternity. Chapter 21. The Machines of War. For centuries, the Egyptian army was simple. Thousands of foot soldiers with spears and shields. But around 1600 before Christ, a technological revolution shook the Nile. This new military technology transformed Egypt from a defensive kingdom into a conquering empire. The centerpiece of this revolution was the war chariot. The Egyptian chariot was a machine of speed and precision. Its design was a masterpiece of lightweight engineering, made of bent wood and leather. It was so light that 2 men could lift it with ease. It carried 2 people, a driver who tied the reins of the 2 horses around his waist to keep his hands free, and a warrior. Their tactic was lightning warfare. Chariots raced at full speed around enemy infantry. They passed again and again, sowing chaos and firing arrows, opening gaps for the Egyptian foot soldiers to strike. To make the chariot deadly, it needed a weapon worthy of it. A regular longbow was too big and unwieldy for a jolting, fast-moving chariot. The solution was the composite bow, the high-tech weapon of the Bronze Age, small and easy to handle, yet capable of storing tremendous energy. It could shoot an arrow with enough force to pierce enemy bronze armor, all from the back of a moving chariot. Finally, when combat turned to hand, the Egyptian soldier used an iconic weapon, the khopesh. At first glance, it looks like a sickle, but it is a deadly bronze sword. Unlike a straight sword designed for thrusting, the khopesh was a slashing weapon. Its curved shape placed all the weight at the tip, giving it the impact of an axe. Soldiers used it to hook and yank an enemy's shield away, leaving him defenseless, or to deliver a sweeping, devastating blow. The chariot provided speed, the composite bow delivered long-range power, and the khopesh ruled close-quarters combat. Together, these 3 technologies turned the pharaoh's army into the most feared war machine of its age. Chapter 22. The Pinnacle of Knowledge, the Lighthouse and the Great Library of Alexandria. The age of the great pyramid-building pharaohs had come to an end. A new power, the Greek Ptolemies, took hold of Egypt, and with them rose a new capital, Alexandria. Although they ruled as pharaohs, the Ptolemies were a dynasty of Macedonian blood, bringing with them Greek language, philosophy, and worldview. This cultural fusion gave birth to the Hellenistic period, a unique chapter in history where Greek rationalism blended with monumentality and the resources of ancient Egypt. The city was designed to be the center of the world. It became the first major global research hub, and its influence rested on two legendary technological sources: the Great Library and the Lighthouse. The Great Library of Alexandria was more an idea than a building. Its mission was to possess a copy of every book in the known world. It worked like an information collecting machine. The pharaoh issued a decree. Any ship docking in the port of Alexandria had to surrender all the papyrus scrolls it carried. An army of scribes copied the originals with astonishing speed. The freshly made copy was returned to the ship, while the library kept the original. But the library, also known as the Museion, the Temple of the Muses, the world's first state-funded research institute. Scholars lived and ate there free of charge, with a single purpose: to think, debate, and discover. It was here that Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy. Here, Euclid wrote the geometric principles we still use today. If the library was the brain, the Lighthouse of Alexandria was the muscle, the guiding light drawing the world toward it. Built on the island of Pharos, it was one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, standing over 100 meters tall, more than 328 feet. It remained for centuries the tallest man-made structure after the pyramids. Its technology operated on two levels. By day, its sheer height served as a vital landmark for ships navigating Egypt's flat and treacherous coastline. But its true marvel came alive at night. At the top, a colossal fire burned without pause, consuming tons of wood. Legend claims that behind this fire stood a piece of lost technology, a giant mirror of polished bronze or reflective metal. This mirror captured the fire's glow and focused it into a concentrated beam, creating a signal so powerful it could be seen 50 kilometers, about 31 miles out at sea. Some stories even said the mirror could be rotated to concentrate the sun's rays and burn the sails of enemy ships, turning it into a defensive weapon. We look back at the past believing ourselves the peak of evolution, yet the Great Pyramid returns our gaze in silence. Perhaps we are not the first masters of high technology on Earth, and perhaps we will not be the last.